Hello, and welcome back to another Read It or Unhaul It reading vlog. This is a challenge I've been doing on my channel since the summer, where every week, or most weeks, unless life happens, I spin a wheel to randomly select one book on my physical TBR. This entire bookshelf is full of books I have not read yet. I have approximately 200, so it's quite a pile to work through, but I have all the titles loaded on a wheel so I can randomly select a book every week or so to read and review for you or unhaul and clear off my shelves. And last month was a bit of a fail in that it took me the entire month to read a single book. It was quite an experience, but hopefully in November I can turn things around and go back a little bit more to the intended timeline of this challenge. I have already spun the wheel because in a moment of desperation while struggling through October's pick and thinking I was going to definitely DNF it, I just spun the wheel for some sort of hope, for light at the end of the tunnel, for the next book to know that I was going to get to read something else at some point. The interminable would in fact terminate and I would finish that book. Anyway, the wheel landed on The Doctor's Sweetheart by L.M. Montgomery. I love L.M. Montgomery, a Canadian icon. The Anne of Green Gables series is a favorite of mine from childhood. The Blue Castle is one of her books that I read as an adult and immediately became an all-time favorite. And when I came across this collection of short stories that is collecting works that she published in various magazines over the course of her life and some really early stories, I was really excited by the idea of kind of getting to see the genesis of her writing, to see her evolve into the writer that she became later with some of her most famous works, and just to get a little bit more of L.M. Montgomery's patented, atmospheric, really descriptive, beautiful writing, focus on the setting of the Canadian landscape, which is something she does so well, and her really vivid, lovable characters, which she also does extremely well. So I was really excited to dive into this and read some of these stories that I had never heard of before. I really don't know what to expect. I guess we'll find out. I obviously have high-ish expectations, though I will say that I don't love every book I've read by L.M. Montgomery. The Anne of Green Gables series has hits and misses for me. I actually have a reading vlog rereading the entire series on my channel if you want to watch that. This is coming in at 180, 190 pages, something like that. And again, broken up into short stories. There are 14 short stories in here. So a little bit easier to read in little snippets, little bite-size, snack-size pieces, and maybe a nice respite for my brain after the struggle that was last month, because last month was a struggle. So we'll see how this goes. I'm excited, and cross your fingers and toes for me that in November I will read more than a single book. One can only hope. Okay, I'm back. I finished The Doctor's Sweetheart, the collection of short stories by L.M. Montgomery. And unfortunately, this wasn't my favorite. experience with L.M. Montgomery. Most of these stories were not for me, unfortunately. There are 14 stories, so I added up my star ratings for each individual story and averaged them out, and it came to 2.92, so I'm gonna say 3 stars, which, you know, is fine. I kind of hoped for better, to be honest, but it is what it is. I will say that most of these stories were love stories in one way or another, and many of them were second chance romance. And I have to say, that's just not my favorite trope when it comes to romance. I often think if it didn't work the first time, there's a reason. Especially in a lot of these stories where they either didn't get engaged or married in the first place, or separated or divorced for good reason, and then they change their mind and decide to get together or get back together for either not so great reasons, or because of random chance, or because of blackmail, sort of. Not my favorite, I'm not gonna lie. There were also a lot of stories where the woman eventually gives in to a man who's been proposing to her for years because she feels pity for him because he's not a good cook or isn't taking care of himself very well, and she feels like he needs a wife to cook and clean for him. Depressing. There were some really cute stories in here, though, I will say that. Also, obviously, some outdated ideas, some outdated language. Most of these stories were published around the turn of the century, so late 1800s, early 1900s, so keep that in mind. There were 3 stories in here that I gave 5 stars to. Those were The Girl in the Wild Race, The Finished Story, and The Bride is Waiting. And then there were 2 4-star stories for me, My Lady Jane and I Know a Secret. The rest were 3 stars and under, and there were a couple 1-star stories that I really didn't like, which were The Parting of the Ways and The Doctor's Sweetheart. The Doctor's Sweetheart in particular, yes, the title story, was the worst by far because it was an age gap relationship that was, in my opinion, just blatant grooming, which obviously I'm not a fan of, and it's written like it's this romantic, incredible love story when it's actually very disturbing. It's a 30-year-old doctor who helps raise an 8-year-old girl, and when she turns 15 and he's 37, they decide they're in love with each other. And then they're not allowed to marry each other. They're cruelly kept apart until she turns 21, at which point he is, you guessed it, 43, and then they're allowed to get married. And isn't that a happy ending? No, it is not. I don't care if it's a different time. Even in the story, a lot of the other characters are like, wow, that's fucked up. The Parting of the Ways was just incredibly depressing and was basically a character saying that their opinion of the entire female gender is based on their experience with this one stranger that they've met and become friends with over the course of a summer. And if she ever did anything to tarnish his opinion of her, he would decide that all women were terrible forever, and it would basically destroy his entire life, and he would never appreciate or like or respect women again. So then she doesn't do something that would make her happy because she's worried about corrupting or ruining the life of this random young man who has decided to put that pressure on her. Not a fan. And there are also just, like I said, a number of stories where characters end up together where I'm just thinking, you're not together already for a reason. Also, the reason why you're deciding to get together now makes no sense, including a story where characters are trapped on a roof for fear of what they perceive to be a vicious dog in the hot sun for hours and then potentially through a thunderstorm. And the man who owns the house takes away the ladder and tells them he'll only let them down and help keep them safe from the dog if one of them agrees to marry him, even though both of them refused his proposal and, through their words made it clear that they did not want to marry him. And again, it's framed as romantic and a love story. There were definitely cute moments here and there. There were characters that were very lovable and vivid. Of course, L.M. Montgomery has a gift for descriptive writing, for setting the scene, for a really vivid sense of place. Very evocative writing, which I love. There's a whimsy to her writing. Her stories are often humorous and definitely evoke a very Canadian setting, which I am nostalgic for. But so many of these stories just rubbed me the wrong way, and some of them were actively disturbing. So for me, this was a very mixed bag. Like I said, Loved some of the stories. The 3 I mentioned that I gave 5 stars to were just absolutely lovely. Each of those 3 made me tear up and get quite emotional. They were sweet, but this collection as a whole was a miss for me. So 3 stars average, not a great time. I don't think I would personally recommend this, to be totally honest with you. I think Ellen Montgomery wrote so much that is so worth your time that I would not waste your time on this unless you were like a super fan or something and you want to read everything she ever wrote. And even still, I think I would tell you to seek out the better stories and leave the rest. And now it's time to spin the wheel and find out what I'm going to be reading next. I'm going to be honest, I did spin the wheel already in the past. I do already know the answer, but here's the spin. Here's the moment that I saw my next read, which is Subdivision by J. Robert Lennon. This was a bit of a whim purchase from Book Outlet, my nemesis. I say that endearingly. My kryptonite, maybe more accurately. I was so intrigued by this cover, and then when I read the blurb, I just knew I had to pick it up, especially for $7. Who can resist? So I'll read the blurb to you. An unnamed woman checks into a guest house in a mysterious district known only as the Subdivision. The guest house's owners, Clara and the judge, are oddly insistent that the woman attend to the baffling jigsaw puzzle in the living room. With little more than a hand-drawn map and vague memories of her troubled past, the narrator ventures out in search of a fresh start in life. Accompanied by an unusually assertive digital assistant named Sylvia, the narrator is drawn deeper into an increasingly strange, surreal, and threatening world, which reveals itself to her through a series of darkly comic encounters with a lovelorn truck driver, a watchful crow, a cryptic birthday party. Harrowing, heady, and deranged, Subdivision is a brilliant maze of a novel from the writer Kelly Link has called a master of the dark arts. I mean, come on, you get it, right? This sounds like a combination of so many of my favorite things. It sounds off the wall and strange, absurd. I'm excited. I can't wait for whatever this has in store. So I'm going to go off and read this one this week, and I'll be back next week to let you know my thoughts. Of course, unless I decide to DNF it for some reason. I already proved last month that that is a struggle for me, but I'm trying to be better about it. So I will DNF, I promise, if I'm really not enjoying it. Okay, I got to the halfway point of Subdivision, and what is happening? I do not know. This might be one of the shortest book updates I will ever film because I don't know what's happening, so I don't know what to say. This is weird as which I like. That's not a bad thing. I just don't know what's happening. So I kind of feel like I have to read to the end and get the reveal of what in the world is going on, because we have either illusions or shape-shifting possible demons, unsure, a really weird fucking town with weird people in it doing weird things, apartments for rent where every room is smaller and weirder, and you just keep crawling through tiny sized doors to tinier rooms. This goes on forever with very strange, slightly violent and slightly erotic art on the walls that the landlady made herself, which is not unsettling at all. I truly don't know what's happening, but I'm fine with it. I'm just going with it. I have a few theories maybe about what's happening. One main theory, well, I guess it's sort of like a twofold, slightly related possible theory. So I'll share that in a spoiler section just in case I happen to be right somehow. I'm enjoying reading it, mostly because I never know what's going to happen next, but I am very curious to see where it goes. So I guess we'll find out. Like I said, I have a couple theories. So let me do a quick spoiler section to share kind of where my head is at, and then I'll just go finish it so I can actually share formed thoughts once I know what the heck is happening. If it even tells us, because this could be the kind of book where it just goes on like this till the end and then says, okay, bye, and lets you pick up the pieces of your broken mind. So anyway, spoilers for the first half of Subdivision. Spoilers. Okay, so my theory basically is either that our narrator is dead and this is some kind of afterlife, because there are a couple, she's had a couple seemingly flashbacks to maybe a traumatic event at a beach. So at first I thought maybe there was a drowning situation, but also now we have a new resident at the house she's renting who is a truck driver, and she seems to remember maybe a truck as part of this memory. He keeps talking like he's a bit traumatized and upset. So I almost wonder if she got hit by a truck he was driving. Maybe they both died. And the puzzle seems to be very connected to her. It seems like every time she learns more about herself or explores the subdivision, the puzzle is more put together, like progress is being made even when she's not actively working on the puzzle. I wonder if there's something to that. And maybe she's not actually dead, but it does still feel like somehow the puzzle is psychically linked to her and her past, that when she finishes the puzzle, she will regain her memories of what happened on that beach and what happened to her and why she's here now. But my major theory is that she is dead. And then we also have the little boy she meets at the coffee shop who is drawing and coloring in pictures of presumably what seems to be domestic abuse between maybe his parents, but now he's alone. So it makes me wonder if he somehow got in between them or something happened, things escalated, and whether, intentional or accidentally something happened to end his life. And so now he's in the afterlife by himself. I don't know. Maybe that is totally off base, but especially with there being a demon and there keep being sort of references to things being dead and sort of a dual visions of death and life, or maybe this is all in her consciousness. I just had a new theory pop into my head. Maybe she's either been hit by that truck or she's drowning or whatever. She's in the instant of dying, or maybe even in a coma due to her injuries or lack of oxygen if she was drowning. And whether it's in that split instant before she passes or she's in a coma, that this is her brain trying to sort through, put together the puzzle pieces of her mind in this state. And if she's able to, then maybe she gets to come back to life. I don't know. That was a brand new theory. Anyway, I could be totally off. This could just be a really weird town. I don't know. But we get the man who is maybe a demon or a badger, who knows, who is trying to rent a house where if you sort of look into the backyard through a specific window at a specific angle, you see that the backyard is totally burnt up and destroyed. And from another angle, it looks lush and alive. And the job she just got is at an office building where there are two identical towers and one is totally destroyed and empty. And the other one has people working in it and is sort of the living tower or the dead tower. So there's sort of that imagery happening too, and a lot of duality. So I don't know, maybe it is like her chance between life and death. I don't know. Anyways, that's my theory. Those are my theories, I guess. And I don't really have anything else to say because, like I said, no idea what is happening. So that's it for spoilers. Those are my theories at the halfway point. I am baffled, but I'm entertained. So I'm going to go finish this and we'll see what we see, right? Yeah. Yes, we will. Okay. I finished Subdivision and I really liked this. This is very weird. It's surreal, it's strange, it's funny at times, but also quite sad. And sort of there's this sense of inevitability that gets heavier and heavier as the book goes on, and you start to put together the pieces of this mystery, puzzle it out, and realize what's likely to have happened and what is happening. And it just marches inevitably to its conclusion, which might be depressing for some people. Some people might not like that, but I kind of appreciated it, to be totally honest. It didn't totally surprise me. Like I said, I was able to guess where it was going from the first half. Honestly, within the first couple chapters, you can start to get an inkling of what's going to happen, but I don't necessarily think that that takes away from this. It's definitely not, full of twists and super shocking and unexpected, but it also is strange and doesn't really explain itself. So it's kind of, for me, I guess, the best of both worlds. I wouldn't say this is a perfect book for me. I think that there was maybe a little bit of sort of emotional resolution missing from the end, a little bit of that final character arc, resolution of the character arc that was maybe slightly missing. We get some answers. We are able to figure out what happened to our protagonist in her past, what she can't remember. But it felt like our protagonist herself, while she started to figure out more and sort of have flashes of understanding, and there are some areas where she came to a conclusion or figured something out for herself. And maybe she figured it all out and just didn't tell us outright, which would be okay, I guess. But it just felt to me a little bit like the book ended and I was still holding my breath a bit for that final moment of our narrator coming to terms with this experience in a way that we didn't quite get. So it almost felt a little unfinished. Not to say that everything had to be explained or that stories have to, be wrapped up with a perfect bow, or characters have to sit down and say to the reader, breaking the fourth wall, going, this is what I learned, and this is what I know about myself, and this is how I changed. Of course not. But it just felt a little bit unfinished to me for her journey, because she spent so much of the book completely unaware of what was happening along with us. And even as we started to figure it out, she wasn't figuring it out. And then at the end, she figures out a few things, but it feels like we are still far ahead of her. And that to me felt a tiny bit unsatisfying. Hopefully none of that is a spoiler. I'm really trying, but I did really like this. I found it entertaining and strange and also very sad at times, and unsettling, but not excessively so, kind of cozy in a creepy way. And quite, it resonated with me emotionally, though it didn't quite hit home all the way because of the main character sort of seeming to still be somewhat in the dark, even at the end. So that is my attempt at a non-spoiler review. I would still recommend this, especially if you're a fan of weird lit, more surreal fiction. You might like this. I found it entertaining. I found it really interesting, and I'll definitely check out more of J. Robert Lennon's work. Some really unique ideas in here, some interesting symbolism that I enjoyed. Lots of metaphor, which was great. But I'm going to do a quick spoiler section to share my interpretation of what happened, because while I do think it's pretty explicit, there are still some things I would say that are probably up for debate. So I'll share how I interpret what this was doing, and a little bit more specifically my qualm with the resolution. And then I'll share my rating and we'll spin the wheel and find out what I'm going to read next. So spoilers for Subdivision starting now. Spoilers, starting now. Okay, I was right that she was on the cusp of death. One of my theories was that maybe she was hit by the truck being driven by the other man staying at this guest house, which was correct. He delivered flowers for a living and he was in his truck. She was in the car with her abusive partner. Unclear whether it was intentional or not. Lost control of the vehicle and was veering toward a river. Whether the truck actually hit them or they just went into the river and were drowning, unclear. But the man driving the flower truck also is on the cusp of death. And she was pregnant, even though her abusive partner didn't want her to be pregnant, thought that he'd decided for them that they weren't going to have kids, and they were having an argument. But the little boy, and also kind of Sylvia, the AI that turns into a bird at the end and is born as a bird, are sort of both metaphors, as far as I can tell, for her unborn child. At one point, I thought that she already had this son and then was also pregnant with a second child, but I'm pretty sure she doesn't have any kids yet and she's pregnant for the first time. So I guess they're both a metaphor for that, unless Sylvia's a metaphor for something else. But she is referred to as being unborn and then being born by the little boy. So it seems like she's a metaphor for the fetus. Maybe that's meant to symbolize that she's far enough along that even if she passes from her injuries, which she seems to do at the end of this book, that they're able to save her baby. Although it didn't seem from the rest of the narrative that she was far enough along for that to be possible, for the fetus to be viable. Not sure. Let me know your interpretation of that. Of course, if you leave spoilers in the comments, please write spoilers for Subdivision and then hit enter a few times so that your actual spoilers will be hidden by the, read more collapsible of a YouTube comment so that you don't spoil anyone else inadvertently. But it seems to me like she hadn't had a child yet, but this boy was meant to represent the child she would have had, and his coloring that he was doing of this domestic abuse situation was potentially real memories of hers, of her relationship with her abusive partner, and what he would have witnessed if he were born and lived with them. She is in the midst of dying. She is on the cusp of death, and paramedics are on the scene, as represented by the bartender at the end, who has a stethoscope and seems to be hooking her up to an IV of vodka because he's a bartender, but the reality is breaking through. This is her barely alive brain's interpretation of the events that are happening to her. And it seems like at the end, she moves on and passes away along with her child, the little boy, and also brings the driver of the flower truck along with her. So he also presumably passed away at the crash site or in the hospital afterwards. Again, I started to have this interpretation early on, so that wasn't a surprise to me. I did feel like as we started to learn more details of her life and the realities of her abusive relationship, I started to feel more and more heartbroken for her that was her lived experience, and also to see some insight into her mindset as someone who has been so controlled and so abused and so belittled for so long that her perspective has become very skewed, as we see in her reviewing of those cases and the way that she has compassion and makes excuses for, the aggressors, the antagonizers in these dynamics, and seems to have very little compassion for the victims of that aggression or abuse in some cases of these stories, or people trying to do the right thing who are just ruining a good man. You can really see that she's internalized the things that her abusive partner has said to her over their presumably long time together. And that was really heartbreaking to read. I just wished, she sort of has that realization near the end that is someone cutting grass? It's literally snowing outside. She does realize near the end, or fully accept, that this little boy is her child and takes responsibility for him. But it feels like even with everything she's been through and realizing that this demon who she keeps seeing in the subdivision is representative of her abusive partner and is chasing her down and trying to hurt her because that's what her partner did in life. And she also sees the mostly finished puzzle and realizes it's a car crash, but it's never fully clear if she recognizes that she was in that car crash and remembers her life fully and realizes what's happening and knows that as she goes to the city on the bus with her son and the flower truck driver, that she is choosing or, progressing into death and moving on to the next phase, whatever that is. So I just felt like I said, that there was a little bit of an unfinished feeling where I wanted her to have some sort of realization, have some sort of acceptance, have a feeling like she caught up to us in our knowledge of the situation in some way that didn't quite feel like it was there. And maybe that's not realistic. I mean, who knows? I don't know what goes on in your brain when you're about to die in those minutes or seconds before death, but it just felt a little bit lacking in that final punch emotionally for me, for her to still feel like she was just in a subdivision and now she's going to the city with her son and her neighbor friend. We as readers know what's happening, but I'm not sure that the narrator does, and that left me feeling a little bit unsatisfied. So those are spoilers for Subdivision, and I think I'm going to give this 4 stars. I found it intriguing, engaging. I was emotionally invested in various characters and as I realized what was happening, but there was just something missing for me in the way the conclusion was handled and executed. I'm really intrigued to read more from this author because I found this quite interesting and definitely up my alley in terms of weird or surreal lit. So would recommend 4 stars for Subdivision. And now let's spin the wheel and find out what I'm going to read this week. So the wheel landed on Bi, Notes for a Bisexual Revolution, which is a nonfiction book that I bought years ago. And here it is. I'll read the blurb for you. This is one of, I think I own in total maybe 4 or 5 nonfiction books about bisexuality that I've been meaning to read. I did initially think I might do a reading vlog about it, but I'm excited that the wheel landed on this because I have had these books for years and I keep putting off making the video, so maybe I should just get into it and start reading them, and they don't have to all be in the same video. That might be a bit much anyway. Maybe that's why I've put it off. Anyway, let me read the blurb to you. Depicted as duplicitous, traitorous, and promiscuous, bisexuality has long been suspected, marginalized, and rejected by both straight and gay communities alike. In this forward-thinking and eye-opening examination, feminist, bisexual, and genderqueer activist Shiri Eisner takes readers on a journey through the many aspects of the meanings and politics of bisexuality. Informed by feminist, transgender, and queer theory, as well as politics and activism, Bi is a radical manifesto for a group that has been too frequently silenced, erased, and denied, and a starting point from which to launch a bisexual revolution. Now, I have no idea what the author means by a bisexual revolution, but I am excited to read this and learn more. I am bisexual, but that doesn't mean that I know everything about bisexuality in general, the history of bisexuality, and all the many intersections therein, but I'm excited to dive in, so I'm gonna go do that. Hello, friends. This is going to be a very short update. It's been a week. I started Bi, Notes for a Bisexual Revolution, but you might have noticed I didn't read that much. Not because I'm DNFing it, don't worry if you were worried. I do plan on finishing this, but I am using a pass and or deferring it a little bit because I actually am finding it so interesting and I'm really enjoying the process of reading it, and I'm already taking so many notes, even though I'm only like 20 pages in. I got through the intro and I'm into the first chapter. I haven't even finished the first chapter and I've taken so many notes, and there are so many things that I want to do more research into that I just realized a few days ago that reading this in a week was not really feasible if I was going to read it at the depth as closely as I personally want to. And it's really inspired me to pick up the other few nonfiction books I have on bisexuality and kind of build a course out of them for my personal curriculum, which I am going to be doing in 2026. I think by the time this reading vlog comes out, I will have already posted my personal curriculum video where I explain what it is in case you're not on TikTok and haven't seen the concept before, and how I built the courses I'm going to be doing at the start of 2026 and what those courses are. And that includes my course on bisexuality from the ancient world to today. And I'm very excited about that, both my personal curriculum in general, but also the specific course. So I didn't finish this week, but I will be finishing it in 2026, and I will let you know what I think of it when I'm done. But I am going to skip over it for my Read It or Unhaul It challenge and save it, and probably take a full month to read it in February, I believe, if I'm remembering my schedule correctly. Sorry that I can't review it now, but if that gives you any indication from just the beginning, obviously I don't know where it goes for the rest of the book, but so far it's bringing up a lot of really interesting ideas. Even as little as I've read, it has introduced me to so many things I didn't know, like the fact that Freud and his whole Oedipus complex idea was intrinsically tied to the concept of bisexuality. I have literally never heard anyone talk about bisexuality in the same sentence as Freud, so that blew my mind. I need to do more research into that. I also didn't know, though it makes sense, that Alfred Kinsey, who is known for the Kinsey scale, was bisexual himself, which explains a lot for his sort of expansiveness and different way of conceptualizing sexuality, and this idea of it being a scale and it being more malleable and fluid than it was maybe thought of before. As a bisexual person myself, that makes sense to me as a way of conceptualizing sexuality, and maybe is something that would be less intuitive, I guess, for a monosexual person. Maybe I should have known this as soon as the wheel landed on it, but I just didn't see it coming, I guess. I thought that I would read this in a week and think, oh, that was interesting. But no, I need to do a full deep dive. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, let's spin the wheel and find out what we get this week. Here it goes. Here it goes. And what is it? Assassin's Apprentice. I literally just filmed the introduction to a reading vlog where I'm reading this book along with the rest of the Farseer trilogy. Spoilers, early access to future videos that are coming. So I'm going to skip this. I mean, technically I could include it and, feed two birds from one hand. I don't really want to give a spoiler of my review ahead of the reading vlog, and it's already going to be in one reading vlog. No, let's just skip it. I'm already reading that book. I'm already reading it. Let's spin again. I could have made this so much easier for myself, but I'm making it harder because that's who I am. Let's remove it and try again. Let's see what we get. Spin the wheel, spin the wheel. What is it? That looks like a long title. Load poems like guns, women's poetry. Oh. I know, wait, I know what this is. Hang on, it's literally at the top of my little basket over here. So I bought this originally for my Reading Around the World challenge that I've been working on, where I want to read a book from every single country on the planet. It's something I've been working on for a couple years now, though last year I made very little progress and I wanted to refocus in on it in 2025. And then I've had one of the worst years of my life this year, so haven't made any progress. But anyway, I bought this for a book to read from Afghanistan. I don't read a lot of poetry, but I do occasionally pick up poetry, and it really depends on the poet, of course, whether it resonates with me or not, but I do enjoy reading poetry. It's just not something that I've done a lot of or comes naturally to me, I suppose, but I am excited to dive into this and see what I think. I love when translated poetry does this. I noticed this in my copy of If Not Winter, which is translations of Sappho's poetry. I love when they have the poem in its original language on one side and then the translation on the other. I don't speak the language. I don't read it. It's a whole different alphabet. So it's not like I can, read both versions as I could if it was in French, for example, which is the only other language I speak and read. But there's just something really, I don't know, there's something about how a poem looks on the page that I want to be able to read it and understand the meaning, but then also to be able to look at it and kind of feel like I'm picking up a little bit more of the original version of the poem, its original form through osmosis, if that makes any sense. Maybe that makes no sense to anyone but me, but I'm a very visual person, so I like being able to see the original poem as it was written, even if I can't read it. So I'm looking forward to reading this. Hopefully this doesn't inspire me to create yet another course and I leave you hanging once more. Sorry about that again. Hey, so it's been a minute since I filmed the last part of this video. It's now 2026. I did answer a number of people who asked me if I was still doing my Read It or Unhaul It challenge to let you know, as well as an announcement on Instagram, that I was going to take the rest of December to finish this poetry collection, to really give it the time I felt it deserved and not be rushing through it, and then to come back in 2026 ready and raring to go with a few changes to the rules, which I'll save for the next video. Let's get to talking about this collection, Load Poems Like Guns. So like I mentioned, I had purchased this because it was a collection of poetry from Afghan poets, specifically female poets from Herat, Afghanistan. And while I technically had already read a book from Afghanistan, it was before I started this challenge. It was The Kite Runner, which I read ages and ages ago, long enough ago that I don't remember anything about it because I read it as a teenager. And for that reason, it felt like it shouldn't count. It felt like I should probably read something fresh in my mind. And as I was researching what I could read, I came across this collection and it just sounded so up my alley. I don't read a lot of poetry, so I'll put that out there. I'm no expert when it comes to poetry, or even someone who has particularly strong opinions on poetry. I mean, I have opinions because I have opinions on everything, but they're not as well informed, I would say. I don't have as much experience or education when it comes to poetry. I do like reading poetry from time to time. Some of my favorites are on my shelves back here. My collection, where is it? Here. If Not Winter, which is a collection of Sappho's poetry. Down here somewhere, I don't know where it is, I have a collection of Amanda Gorman's poetry that I really enjoyed. I've also read some poetry collections in the last couple of years that just did not really do anything for me, like Margaret Atwood's most recent, I think it was her most recent collection, Dearly, something like that. Didn't quite land for me. Anyway, regardless, but I was curious about this not only because I was interested to see what was popular for different forms of poetry in Afghanistan. I always think it's interesting to get a sense of different cultures through the poems they write, through the structure of their novels, through common tropes in their stories, what their fairy tales are like, what their music is like. And I thought that would be an interesting little, and I thought it would be really interesting to get to know this part of Afghanistan's literary history or legacy, I guess. I also knew that this was a collection of multiple poets, so I thought that might give me an interesting breadth of an idea of at least the poetry scene in Herat specifically, which I thought would be interesting. And because it's translated, I always find translation interesting. I love when novels or poetry collections are translated and you get notes from the translator on their thought process, which this one had in spades. Every separate poet had a page or two, sometimes three, of notes on translation and sort of the unique challenges of translating that specific poet's work, and I just ate it up. I love reading about the challenges of translation. It's just one of my favorite niche interests, I don't know. So loved every single one of those sections, and each section about a different poet had a little biography, so you could learn about them. While this collection does have a variety of female poets, and I think has roughly an equal number of poems from each of them, it definitely feels like an ode to one specific poet, Nadia Anjuman, who was tragically killed at 25. And she, not only before her death, was an inspiration for her commitment to education and to creativity, to being a poet, to expressing herself artistically through the period where the country was controlled by the Taliban and afterwards. And she not only inspired her colleagues and friends and family at the time, but has also inspired many female poets that came after her death in the early 2000s. And I just felt that this collection did a really good job, not only of giving a really nice foundation for the history of Herat, especially its literary tradition, its artistic community, but it also gave a really thorough overview of Nadia's life and all of the moving pieces that came together to not only result in her fame and acclaim as a poet, but also her tragic death. I found myself very emotional reading about her life. I could feel that Farzana Marie respected Nadia so much and felt so deeply passionate about telling her story and sharing it with a wider audience. And it's a very emotional story. It's upsetting. She was taken from the world far too soon, and reading, I'm going to get emotional, reading her poems, knowing what would happen to her is just devastating on a whole other level. Her poetry is overtly about the experience of being an Afghan woman under the oppressive regime of the Taliban, but it's also a cry for help from a woman who was in an abusive marriage and would end up dying for it. And it's really emotional. It's really hard to read, but her poetry is also beautiful and very moving. And I'm really grateful that I was able to learn about her life and read her poetry and have just such a deeper appreciation for what she was able to do for her fellow female poets and the poets, like I said, who would come after her. And then to get to read so many of these poems from female poets who were inspired by what she was able to do and see the many different ways that they were able to express themselves through poetry and all the different styles that they have and the different themes and motifs that they're focused on. And there is definitely a through line, but they also all have their own unique creative voice. And I just thought it was really lovely. Like I said, the translation notes were amazing. I loved them for very nerdy reasons. I love reading about the challenges of translating, especially poetry. I think has so many more layers of complication on top of something like, translating a novel is hard, translating a play is hard, but translating poetry, if you're trying to keep the meter, if you're trying to keep the rhythm or the rhyme scheme or all the different layers of meaning, it's just a whole other can of worms. And I loved reading about that. And like I said, I really felt like the introduction, the early chapters giving a history of Herat and talking about Nadia's life were incredibly informative, fascinating. I loved a lot of the poems. There are definitely, it's a collection with many, many poems, and some of them didn't resonate with me as deeply, or I wasn't as moved by them. But there were quite a few poems that I tabbed as a favorite overall, and many, many lines that really moved me and I thought were quite lovely or quite evocative with some really vivid imagery. And it was just so interesting to see all the many different styles, to see some of the more traditional ancient styles of poetry, like the ghazals, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, as well as more modern forms of poetry. Even get to see sometimes from the same poet, very different styles. I just really enjoyed the experience of reading this, and I'm very glad that I gave myself the time to read it at the pace that made sense for me. I liked being able to pick this up and read the biography and the translation notes, and then read the 3 to 4 poems from that poet, and to be able to sit with each one and think about them, and then to take a break of a few days to let those sort of percolate, and then to do the next one, and not to read poem after poem after poem after poem back to back to back just to get it done. I really needed to sit with it. And even just reading Nadia's life story in the introductory chapters, I had to sit and process for a while. So I would recommend this highly. I'm going to give this collection 5 stars. I thought it was really great. I'm very, very glad I picked it up, and I would recommend it to you, but also with a caveat of give yourself time to read it. Don't just read it all in one sitting. You could, I guess. I just don't think you'll get as much out of it. And I'm really glad that I gave myself the time that I needed. Check it out. Pick up a copy if you can manage to get one. I thought that this was really great. And I'm very tempted to buy a few more copies of this to give to some of my friends and family who I think will be just as moved by all the different moving parts in this collection. So that wraps up this video. Technically, this is going to count as my first Read It or Unhaul It read of 2026 because I finished it in 2026, so I'm going to put it in that category, but also kind of, in some ways, the last one of 2025, and a great way to end this challenge. So, like I said, I'm going to be continuing in 2026. I will be shifting to a bi-weekly schedule rather than every single week, just to give myself a little bit more wiggle room, a little more leeway to get through each of the books that the wheel lands on, so that if I have a busier week, if I have a lot of books that I need to read for a video, or if I need to finish a book club pick or whatever, or if my life is just chaotic that week, I have a little bit more grace, a little more time to get through each read. And for that reason, these YouTube reading vlogs, compiling them, are going to come out every other month instead of every single month, so I can still ideally have roughly 4 books in each video. It'll just be over the course of 2 months instead of a single month. But don't you fret, I am actually introducing a second reading challenge that's going to go on the alternating weeks. So even though you'll only see one of these Read It or Unhaul It reading vlogs every other month, on the alternating months, you'll see reading vlogs of this style for a second reading challenge that I'm introducing, which I'm very excited about. A hint for you is that this book can work for both reading challenges. See if you can guess in the comments down below. Patrons, don't tell anyone. I already told my patrons what I'm doing. I might have also let it slip in a few comments, but I'm curious how many of you will get it right. But I'm excited to continue this in the new year. I'm excited to keep working my way through my physical TBR because I still have a full bookshelf and it's not pretty. I mean, it is pretty, but I need to read more of these books. But that's it for me. I'm going to wrap up this video so I can go film the intro for the next reading vlog and I can spin the wheel and find out what I'm going to be reading next. I hope you're still enjoying this challenge. Thank you to everyone who's been so excited about it and enthusiastic and supporting me through it. It's also been really awesome to see how many of you have started your own similar challenge as I've been doing this, so we can support each other through it. I don't know off the top of my head what my stats were for 2025, but I will share somewhere on the screen where I started and where I ended in terms of number of physical books owned and how many I read for this challenge and how many physical books I read outside of this challenge. I read a good amount, but I also added a good amount. But I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm gonna go. Thanks for watching this video. Like it if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already. Join us on Patreon if you want to hang out with me more often. We have a good time over there. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.